Today, we welcome at Global Citizenship Education interview series, Liezel Frick. Liezel Frick is Associate Professor in the Department of Curriculum Studies and the Director of the Center for Higher and Adult Education at the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Her research interests are within the broader field of doctoral education, with a particular focus on aspects of doctoral creativity and originality, learning during the doctorate and doctoral supervision. Very welcome to Professor Liezel Frick.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor.
So first of all, I'm very, very happy to have you here because you are the first scholar offering perspectives on global citizenship, global learning, from the Global South, the so-called Global South, because you're located in South Africa, Stellenbosch University. And next week, we will have Professor Youssef Vagdid, also from Stellenbosch University. But you are the first. So a warm welcome. We really need perspectives from the Global South, and we look forward to hearing your experiences.
Well, thank you. I first have to say that I cannot speak for all of the Global South. My perspective will be just that, my perspective, but it is a great honor to be invited to be part of this conversation series, and also a great honor to be joined by my esteemed colleague, Youssef Vagdid from Stellenbosch University in the next conversation. And I applaud you for including voices from the South, because I think it is, if we talk about global citizenship education, we have to look beyond our own boundaries and borders, so to speak, in a disciplinary sense, but also in a geographic sense. So thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. And you and I were discussing just before this video recording that there is a need of perspectives on global citizenship, again, from the Global South. Of course, you are one voice, and then we will have additional voices and hopefully and increasingly more voices from the Global South, particularly, as I said, on global citizenship education. And I'm very interested on your field of study, your research focus on doctoral education. And so how your work and your focus on doctoral education connects with global citizenship. I think this will be very interesting for our viewers.
Well, I think I hadn't thought of it before, actually, but when I started reading, I realized there's quite an obvious link, because the language of research, the language of science, is a global language. We might disagree as scholars, we might have fervent debates about issues, but those are debates that get put into the field of science, and regardless of the discipline or disciplines in which we function. And so the future of research and depends on our doctoral scholars of today and tomorrow, and the way in which we educate them for a world that is becoming less predictable, more complex, and more globalized in many ways, despite sometimes people's ways of closing down and isolating themselves in various ways. Doctoral education, by its very nature, is international and is global. And so I've been wondering, as somebody interested in doctoral education, I think the curriculum in doctoral education is often not spoken about. It is a much more sort of intuitive curriculum, I suppose, that of knowledge creation at a high level, pushing the boundaries of a particular area of interest. And so what we teach students is sometimes not that explicit. Barbara Lovitz talks about making the implicit explicit in doctoral education. And I think we're not particularly good at this specific aspect of helping our doctoral students think of how they position the knowledge that they create within a more globalized world, beyond you know, which journal am I going to send potential publications to, or which examiners am I going to have as potential international examiners?
Right.
But the actual research and the knowledge that they create, how does it speak to this kind of globalized world in which we live? How does my research not only potentially influence the study site, even if I don't do generalizable research, but how does it influence somebody in Japan where you are?
Right.
How would it speak to them? Do I actually know or think about it at all as a doctoral scholar or as a doctoral supervisor for that matter? And so I think the idea or the notion of global citizenship education has particular relevance to doctoral education. We were just speaking about a UNESCO report towards 2030 focused on research and researcher education. And it noted that of all the sort of post-school education levels, doctoral education researchers are the most mobile in the world. And interestingly enough, those from the African continent are the most mobile.
Right.
Now, there are various
Right.
reasons for that, but it also makes us wonder this kind of mobility, be it physical or virtual or in terms of knowledge exchange, how does that prepare our doctoral scholars of today and the researchers of the future, the academics of the future, to function in what Ron Barnett calls this kind of super complexity? And I think we need to think more constructively about global citizenship education as part of the kind of doctoral curriculum. And by that, I don't mean that we have to introduce a module on global citizenship education, but I think this conscientization of what it is and how we need to think about it within doctoral education is a really interesting field that we haven't really explored conceptually or empirically really that much. We've looked at mobility trends, and we've looked at doctoral experiences of international students and supervisors' experiences and so forth, but we haven't really looked at it from within the framing of global citizenship, I think. And I think that's a gap in the field. So
very interesting, very interesting. And I think this illustrates very well the connection between your focus on doctoral education and global citizenship, and the need to sort of focus more on the connection between curriculum and global citizenship. And here I'd like to ask you a straightforward question. What is, in your opinion, global citizenship and global citizenship education, based on your background, experiences, and also personal views?
Well, I think if I look at the literature on global citizenship, there are a variety of frameworks that actually quite well speak to this issue, regardless of the context in which you do. And I quite like the kind of concentric circle idea of starting from the self going to the familial, and then going to the local, the national, and then the global. And I think global citizenship education cuts through all of these layers. It's not just in the outer layer. It is linking that inherent self. How does that self function? How do we think about who we are and what we do within all of these layers? And how are these layers interconnected in complex ways? So I think, to me, that's quite a good conceptualization. I also like to link the idea of global citizenship education to the kind of ontological questions that we have. Who am I? And within the sphere of doctoral education, who am I as a researcher? And who do I want to become? So it has to do with the ideas of being and belonging. Where do I see myself belonging, where I can be myself in terms of who I see myself to be as a doctoral researcher? And those are interesting questions to me. And they're not specific answers that you might be looking for, but I think that more interesting debates lies in the questions that we haven't answered yet.
But at the end, be prepared. I will ask you to sort of define with some keywords, the notion of global citizenship, but this is supposed to be sort of a surprise at the end, and all the guests here are going through this sort of complex question, but we will discuss that later. One question instead I want to ask you is related to your journey as a South African educator and how this relates to notions of global citizenship and global citizenship education.
I was actually thinking about that, you know, on a very personal level, and these kind of concentric circles. And growing up in South Africa, and I think Yusuf's story in this sense would, I hope you put the same question to him, because you'd probably have, you know,
Similar.
it would be interesting because it would be very different answers, because our journeys probably been so different because of the history of South Africa. So I grew up, I was born in South Africa, and in the time when it was still an apartheid state. And that defined who we were nationally, regardless of which family you were born into. But it meant that you had very different opportunities. Now, I was sort of at the real tail end of it. So I think as a kind of historical consequence, I still have had many more opportunities than many other people. And I have to acknowledge that. And I need to be cognizant of that in my understanding of myself as a global citizenship and as somebody on this journey in a globalized world. But at the same time, there were things that the world only really opened up to us after 1994. So I was very lucky to be sort of at the tail end, because in 1994, I was still a university student. So when I started my academic career much later, I think there were many more opportunities for us to be able to move beyond our own localized worldviews. And I think I've reaped the benefit of that. And I've been very fortunate and to have had the opportunity to collaborate and be exposed to amazing world-leading scholars throughout the world, which if I'd been born earlier, I would probably not have had as much as part of my journey. But at the same time, and given your introduction, I think being part of the Global South sometimes makes it somewhat more difficult on that journey because of geographical accessibility, because of funding opportunities and available funding, exchange rates, things like visa requirements. I mean, we have to have a visa just about for every country in the world, it feels like. So those are kind of impediments that, you know, make it harder, not just in terms of a kind of, you know, academic tourism. That's not really what I'm talking about, but being able to traverse these kind of national boundaries and being able to work together in a very sensible way. So, but I've been very fortunate that I've had amazing opportunities along the way that have shaped my own research and my own thinking and my own career. And I will forever be grateful to the many scholars along the way that from both the Global North and the Global South that have shaped that kind of trajectory. And doctoral education is a rather small field of research. It's not one of the major fields of research, but the people generally who work in this field are extremely generous, regardless where they come from. And that has also been a wonderful, I think, way of looking. And that's another question that one might ask, and to say, to look at the field of doctoral education as through the framework of global citizenship, and to see, for instance, we have IDEN, International Doctoral Education Research Network, that I'm currently leading together with Gina Whisker from the UK.
Okay.
And so this network is sort of a loosely knit, informal network. We have a listserv. We try to meet every 2 to 3 years linked to a conference. In the past year, we've started having webinars like everyone else. And so the Doctoral Education Research Network is one of those spaces where I think we really practice global citizenship as scholars.
Yeah.
Because it is a space in which you can share your research, but you can also put questions to the community for information, for background, for input. And it's a wonderfully generous sharing community. And I think a fantastic case study of global citizenship within a research field.
That's very interesting. I think we should definitely include a link to the network under your interview later. So that would definitely be interesting for our viewers as well. But what you're saying is very, very interesting. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think you are putting into context the notion of global citizenship as a sort of a notion that means also linking together the involvement of several scholars from different backgrounds discussing what is, in this case, because you're focusing on doctoral education, what is doctoral education. So I think that's very, very interesting. Aspect of it.
Yes, so every 2 to 3 years when we have our meetings, it's just a 1 to 2 day meeting that we have prior or after a conference, so people can get funding to get there. Sure. And we try and host it every time in a different country. So we've had meetings. The first one I think was in Canada. The second one was in Malaysia. Then we had one in South Africa, I think, and then we had one in Australia, and we had one in Japan. Next was supposed to be last year in Denmark, and I'm hoping that we might still in future have it in Denmark. So we try and move graphically to accommodate as many people as be able to attend. And so it's one of those, and what we talk about during these meetings is that we are all practitioners, we are all researchers in the field, but our focus is very specifically on talking about our research understanding of research, a kind of setting in a research agenda for the future for doctoral education research. And I think it's a very meaningful way of linking these different ontological perspectives to a kind of epistemological drive of how do we create knowledge within the field that will be meaningful to people working within that area, and then the kind of trickle down to, or trickle sideways to practitioners and policymakers and decision makers and so forth.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an interesting case study of global citizenship, and I think, but also something that really has interested me for many years, and is the work of Max Neef around transdisciplinarity. And what I find in doctoral education is that we really have to work across disciplines in order to understand what the field is about. Because doctoral education doesn't just happen in education. It's actually, doctoral education cuts across all of the different academic disciplines. And therefore, to have a kind of really understanding of how things are done and how knowledge gets created in different disciplines. And there are nuanced differences. Of course, there are similarities, but there are many differences as well. You have to have this kind of collaboration across disciplines. And I think that strengthens the kind of understanding, and it feeds into the idea of global citizenship. I was involved in a wonderful project at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm in Sweden. That's a medical institute, but around supervisor education in the context of doctoral education, and where they had an advisory board advising them on their doctoral education system for supervisors from across the world. And I think those kinds of initiatives really speak to the notion of global citizenship. So it's not just about the mobility of doctoral students having and of course that's part of it, but I think there are much more interesting examples than the obvious when we think of global citizenship in terms of doctoral education as well.
So the next question I'd like to ask you is related to your experience as the director at the Center for Higher and Adult Education at Stellenbosch University, and how potentially this relates to notions of global citizenship and global citizenship education.
Okay, so I think maybe just first a very brief background. Our center is positioned within the Faculty of Education, and we focus on post-school education, and we only run postgraduate programs in the areas of higher and adult education.
Yeah.
Which means in our context that the majority of our students are part-time working adult learners or students, both at postgraduate diploma, master's, and doctoral levels. It also means, because of that they can often not access the kinds of opportunities that exist within the university for instance, student mobility. In contrast to, for instance, a student working in the STEM area in a laboratory setting where they're doing their research full-time, they visit a laboratory elsewhere, and they work together with researchers from around the world.
Right.
That is in their laboratory or where they go to visit. It also means, because they're part-time students, they can often also not access the kinds of funds available for travel to conferences that are often earmarked to full-time students.
Right.
So those kinds of things make it somewhat difficult to take the local to the global in our context. So we have decided to bring the global to the local. And how do we do that? So from a very practical level, we have made an effort to have really world-class researchers associated with us formally as research associates, as extraordinary professors. We focus on projects. Well, we don't only focus on that, but we have projects where we collaborate with researchers from other countries, and we draw our students into those projects. So I've just a master's student who have just completed her research project in the field of doctoral education on doctoral students' experiences. And my co-supervisor was Professor Kirsi Fialto from the University of Helsinki. So there are various ways in which we work in order to give our students that kind of exposure. So whenever our colleagues get to travel to South Africa, we also create opportunities where they can interact with our students, where we have seminar series or where the students do presentations of their own research to these scholars and where they get feedback on their work and these kinds of opportunities. So it takes a bit more effort, I think, from us to bring the global to the local, but it's definitely not impossible. And we have found that many of these kind of relationships are long-term relationships that built up over years with colleagues whom we know and we know have a sensitivity towards our context. And it's been a wonderful journey for us as a center, together with these kind of colleagues from all over the world that take a keen interest in our work and in our students' work. We involve colleagues in our curriculum development within the different programs. And that's also been a very fruitful area for us. We co-publish with colleagues. Sometimes we involve them in our short courses that we present, which is mainly built around postgraduate supervision, academic writing, and those two other academics. And we involve our colleagues from abroad in various ways in that. And I think it has become even more so over the past year amidst the global COVID pandemic, for people to be involved, because now we don't expect somebody to travel halfway across the world to contribute. We can do it synchronously or asynchronously online. And I think it's opened many more doors and possibilities for us. I also think in our programs, we explicitly try and build in elements into the curriculum that helps students think beyond their localized selves. For instance, in our master's program, we have a a module on perspectives in higher education and then perspectives in lifelong learning. And we make a great effort to have a balance of the kind of literature and input that we have there that is both local and global. We now have a project together that's funded by the British Council together with the Department for Higher Education and Training in South Africa, focused on higher education capacity development. So we are taking a cohort of doctoral students based at one of our sister universities in South Africa, Walter Sisulu University, ourselves, Stellenbosch University, and Coventry University in the UK. And we're working together as colleagues from all three universities with a cohort of doctoral students coming from all three of these universities. And they will all be doing their PhDs in the broader area of higher education studies around three key themes. But that's a way in which global citizenship happens, because both the supervisors involved and the candidates involved will interact on a kind of global platform.
Yeah.
And I think in doctoral education, we need to think creatively about these kinds of opportunities and how we can use them. And this will be a kind of joint degree program where candidates will, the awarding institutions will be Stellenbosch University and Coventry University. And so I think these are the kinds of things that we can explore more in future that feeds very positively potentially into the idea of global citizenship education.
It's very interesting because you're discussing the notion of global citizenship as rooted within the work you're doing, so directly implemented within the work you're doing rather than theoretically. And I think this is very interesting because it speaks to the one of the issues, not issues, but probably one of the areas that needs to be addressed when we discuss global citizenship, the fact that there is a lot of theory, but less discussions in practical terms, how to implement it within a curriculum, within a, in this case, within a field, within a broader area. And I think what you're saying is very, very interesting. And now I like to sort of close the circle by asking you a question that instead is more theoretical, and is the question that all the guests here at Global Citizenship Education Interview Series are asked. And it's not an easy question, but it's a very interesting question for our viewers. And the question is, how would you define global citizenship education using three keywords, and why these three keywords?
Okay. It was very difficult for me to narrow it down to three.
Okay. Okay.
I have four.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
And I would say they are the 4 R's. So the first is risk. I'll explain them in a bit. The first is risk.
Sure.
The second is responsiveness. The third is responsibility. And the fourth is respect.
Okay, interesting.
So if I may just elaborate a little bit on these words, I think for me, why I would like to include risk is because if I think about doctoral education specifically, risk, it's a risky business. It's about extending our knowledge in a particular field or challenging the existing knowledge within a field, and that's risky.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of work around creativity and originality in doctoral education, and that's the whole notion of risk comes to the fore. And I think it links to global citizenship education in the way that if we are only doing research in a very narrow sense, it's less risky, I suppose. But if we have to put it on a kind of global platform, as we should at a doctoral level, then it's more risky that it might not be receptive or received well within the global sphere. So we always have to think about our knowledge creation, about our pedagogies, about the systems that we have within a kind of global context, and not very narrowly localized. And that carries an element of risk. So and risk I don't perceive necessarily as negative. I think there are many potentially positive aspects to risk. We don't change our thinking. We don't change the way we do things if we don't take risks. So
I think the risk that you are describing to me sounds more like courage of taking bold steps, courageous steps, and applying notions of global citizenship and so on within the field by taking courageous steps. That's what I got from your element of risks.
And sort of linked to Paulo Freire's work, in the sense, it takes courage to take risks.
yes, absolutely.
Okay. My second R is around responsiveness. Now, you could be this idea of responsiveness, that you have to be future orientated and not only respond. But I think sometimes there are things outside of our control. For instance, like the current global pandemic. There are things that happen globally that we cannot control necessarily, that we have not. Brexit. In South Africa, we had no control really, I think, over Brexit. Yes, yet it has an influence on the way in student mobility, for instance. It has an influence on how we can collaborate within the EU, for instance. Where previously it would have been linked to the UK, it might no longer be at them now. So how do we respond to that? And how constructive is our responsiveness? And our doctoral students, in terms of how do there are always glitches in doctoral programs. I've never ever heard of a doctoral project that didn't have some other glitch somewhere along the line. It can be small, it can be much larger, but how do we help our students to be resilient? Maybe it's even a better word than responsiveness, but that kind of resilience and to be responsive in a constructive way.
Right.
And I think in terms of global citizenship, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility on the one hand as supervisors. In doctoral education, we have a responsibility to educate our students for a globalized world that's unpredictable, that's complex, and all those things that are very well documented. As doctoral candidates, we have a responsibility to do research that is meaningful and contributes to making the world a better place. And that is not just about getting published. It is not just about getting the degree or getting a postdoctoral fellowship. It is about thinking about who you are and what you are doing within the greater social realm. And I was very interested in the conceptualization of global citizenship, that it can be sort of seen from a new liberal perspective or from a social justice or a humanist perspective. And I think it's important for doctoral students to understand those kind of discourses and what they mean, and how it impacts on their work and what they do now and what they will be doing in the future. And those are the kinds of conversations that we should be having with them. That's our responsibility, I think.
Yeah.
And I think my final R in conceptualizing what I would see would be respect. Because I think you cannot be a global citizen, and you cannot educate people towards global citizenship if you do not have a sense of respect for the other. The other might be a different person, it might be a different culture, it might be a different geography, it might be a different system, it might be a different discipline. There are so many sort of aspects to it, but having that inherent respect for human and non-human life as not wrong but different, I think is part of what we should be educating towards. And that is probably more innate and less tangible and more part of the kind of hidden curriculum. It's not something that we necessarily overtly teach people. It's not a skill that you can develop. But I do think if we're talking about global citizenship, it is innately part of what we are talking about. So those are my 4 R's. And
so it's risk, responsiveness, responsibility, and respect, which is core, of course. It's very interesting because, as you know, I interviewed and we had several conversations with several scholars in my recent book as well, that will be published by Routledge soon in March 2021. There is this a group of senior scholars discussing a lot of very interesting elements as they connect to global citizenship, and the notions of respect, responsibility, they really come up a lot. And I think there is a fundamental truth in what you're saying, in the sense that these are, we can call it values, fundamental values, as they attached in a way to our discussion related to notions of global citizenship and global citizenship education, or global learning as well. So very, very interesting to see this, some of the values coming up frequently, of course, then described, as you nicely described, within a specific context, your own context, your perception of these values. So this was a very, very interesting conversation, and I'd like to thank Liezel Frick for joining us for Global Citizenship Education Interview Series. At the moment, you are located in South Africa. Where exactly?
In Stellenbosch.
Stellenbosch.
So it's close to Cape Town.
Close to Cape Town.
In the Western Cape province. So it's in the sort of southern part of South Africa.
Okay. And again, it was a real pleasure to have you here and share your perspectives. Is there any final thoughts or any coming up project, anything you'd like to mention in closing with our interview series on global citizenship?
Well, firstly, I would like to thank you, Emiliano, for this opportunity. It's been a wonderful conversation for me too, in many ways, meeting you for one, but also thinking about global citizenship within the context of doctoral education is not something that I've really explored before. And it has raised so many more interesting questions for me. I think there is really such a lot that we can still explore within the context, both conceptually and empirically, that it has really been a fruitful experiment for me, in the sense of pushing my own thinking and my own ideas around how do I look at doctoral education, both as a practitioner, as a researcher, as a theorist. And so thank you very much for giving me that opportunity.
No, you offer definitely, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, a very interesting link between doctoral education and global citizenship, newly explored. So that was very interesting conversation. And so really, really thank you so much. And we look forward to having you here again in the future, so you can share with us new perspective and new projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you.